I can call you a lot of things, but a transphobe isn't one of them. Central Perk, Monk's Cafe, McLaren's Pub, Cheers, Paddy's Pub. What do all of these places have in common? And it's not that they take place in sitcoms. It's that they're all examples of what can be called a third place. A third place is somewhere you can go to in your community that's different from your first two places. Home and work. To say that another way, your first place is where you go to when you're clinically depressed. Your second place is what makes you clinically depressed, and then your third place is where you go to mask your clinical depression with crippling social anxiety. Whenever a sitcom wants to create an atmosphere of community, gathering, idea sharing, or love for the city it takes place in, it's almost always going to have a portion of the episode take place either in someone's home or at a third place. Third places are an important part of feeling a sense of community, building new communities, and sharing ideas. Despite all of this importance for third places, there's a problem. Third places are dying. In this video, I want to establish what a third place is, why it is that they're so important, why it is that they're dying, and how we all can rebuild third places in our communities. Nailed that take. Nailed it. Parentheses, title card.
Thai foods fine by me, I'm into. Are we going to a museum or to see a friend?
I know you can't smell it, but that is absolutely wonderful peach tea. I wanted to really give tea shop energy with this little shot here, and yes, it is a John Fetterman mug. I bought it when he was cool. Before we can talk more about third places, it's probably important that we define them in a bit more detail than just a loose collection of examples from some sitcoms, because while most of my personality definitely comes from sitcoms at this point, there's probably some value in finding sources with actual credibility. Third places are actually not that difficult to pin down to at least a good layman's definition, unlike some other things that I can think of, like the word queer, apparently. And remember to like, comment, and subscribe if you want more 30-minute diatribes about things that really didn't need that much effort to define. In an academic study conducted by the Public Affairs and Education Department at Cleveland State University, 477 normal people were asked, how do you define a third place in your community? And I think the results give us a good idea of how people not lost in the sauce of academia actually think about what a third place is in their life. Now, we got people mentioning stuff like community centers, parks, cafes, coffee shops, what have you, the grassland in the middle of their cul-de-sac. We have a lot of examples of third places, but I think it's a little telling that the largest response group, 29%, the people couldn't think of a single place in their neighborhood or in their community that they define as a third place. Now, this could be just because they didn't have a good definition in their head of a third place when they were contacted by Cleveland State University. Or it could be really indicative of a growing systemic issue with the absence of third places in communities. That, kids, is called foreshadowing, something that I would do more subtly if I actually had any ability to read or write, but instead I'm going to slam it in your face as hard as I can. However, there is a really good definition that we can work off of that comes from one of the most prominent scholars in the study of third places and their role in American society, Ray Oldenburg, who in his 1999 book, The Great Good Place, defines a third place as having 8 characteristics. First, Third places are a neutral ground. You can come, you can go whenever you want. Second, the third places are levelers. No matter what your rank is in the community, once you enter a third place, you're the same as anyone else. No one's above or below each other. Third, conversation is the main activity. Now that doesn't mean it's the only activity. Bowling alleys can have bowling. Pool houses can have pool, but it needs to be that really pool is just a secondary activity to the main activity happening in the third place, conversation, getting to talk to other people, a foreign concept, I know. Fourth, accessibility. They're easy to get to. I hope that's clear enough. If your third place is really hard to get to, it's not a great third place. 5. Regulars are present. Regulars should be a part of your third place. Newcomers are always welcome, of course, but there should be regulars there who are able to create a consistent culture and atmosphere to the third place. The best example of this in sitcoms would be the main gaggle of people who always are showing up to their favorite pub or cafe whenever, and they are always the ones that are driving the culture of that space. Number 6, a low profile. There are places where you can kick back, you can be cash, you can have your John Fetterman mug and not feel too judged by other leftists who think you're a shill, when again, you bought it when he seemed cool and when he didn't seem like the worst possible thing that you could have come out of Pennsylvania since, I don't know, veggie trays? Fracking? I think fracking is the worst thing to come out of there.
I support fracking, and I stand, and I do support fracking.
And Fetterman loves it, so. Tastes like betrayal. Number 7, a playful mood. Being witty and fun isn't just allowed, it's actually encouraged. That's why I'm not welcome in third places. 8th, and finally, it feels like home. You're able to go there, use it how you wish. There's no intense expectation that you clean up vigorously after every single piece of furniture is moved. It's home, and you get to treat it like home. I think a really good example of how to think of third places as uniquely different from the other types of places in our lives is by looking to the work from Professor of Informatics at UC Irvine, Constance Steinkuhler, who wrote in her 2006 work, Exploring MMOs as a sort of virtual third place, the following. First and foremost, third places are defined as neutral grounds where individuals can enter and leave as they see fit without having to ask permission or receive an invitation, as one might in a private space, and without having to play host for anyone else. Compare, for example, weekday attendance at the workplace to happy hour attendance at the neighborhood tavern. The former is a second place, marked by financial obligation and rules that structure who is expected to be where and for how long. The latter is a third place, marked by relative freedom of movement. Now, I'm not going to say that you need all 8 of these factors in force in order for where you are to be classified as a third place, but I think that they're all good indicators of whether or not the space you're in should be classified as a third place. For example, I do think third places kind of require that there's a little bit of neutrality to them, and also that they are accessible. But if the main activity isn't fully having a conversation, it involves a little bit of Scrabble, or maybe doing some eyes wide shut weirdness, it's probably still a third place in the eyes of some or most people. It just may not be everyone's cup of tea as a third place. For me, the third places that I like to go to is my local coffee shop, the dog park, temple, going out on runs and enjoying all the running trails around my city, and also the lounges in my apartment. Along with all of that, there's even the sacrificial altar out in the woods that I visit during the equinoxes. Those are all really wonderful third places where I'm able to do different work and to be more like myself while I'm in them. I really feel more at peace when I visit these third places because they can either help me meet new people, they can help me experience something a little different from the malaise of being home all day, or they can just reset me mentally because I'm now doing something different than just whatever it is I do in here all day. I love these third places and I love that I have access to them in my life and in my city. Unfortunately, for many people, they don't feel like that they have access to third places. And they feel like that they're losing the few third places they have in their life if they're using any at all. And losing a third place in your life can be genuinely distressing.
On a quiet cul-de-sac, picket fences, welcome mats. There's a perfect model home where I spend my days alone, singing, what a neighborhood, what a neighborhood. No sidewalks, nowhere to go, no sidewalks.
I feel like there's no better personal illustration that the impact of losing a third place can have on us than that little oopsie poopsie of a pandemic that we had in 2020. Now, I don't think we need to get into all of the particulars of what went on during that time for you to understand what I'm talking about, but I think it's fair to say that for nearly all of us, for at least a full year, we experienced a really intense feeling of being small, sealed away, being trapped. That is, of course, if you're one of those people who allowed yourself to be cuckolded by a man named Gavin Newsom. Gavin is who you let tell you what to do? Nerd. God. Now, a lot of other really awful things happened during 2020, like Harry and Meghan Markle moving to the United States, but I think it's fair to say that the great pandemic, the plague, was probably a major contributing factor to the radical decline of people's mental health during that time, and that there's probably not many other major confounding factors. But the question is, if you're someone who didn't, lose a loved one during that time, and you aren't someone who had to go through extreme bouts of being really ill because of the plague, then why was the average person's mental health collapsing during that time? Now, some of it is probably because there was just a lot of stressful news, a lot of negative news, a lot of bad events. But it also could have been because we all lost our third places during that time. I mean, during that time, many of us even lost our second places. A lot of us had to turn our first place into our second place, and vice versa. And shout out to all of the people who did not have that luxury of turning their second place into their first place, and then was called a dirty low-down communist for committing the grievous sin of wearing a mask. That's what I have in my notes here. Wearing a mask was what got you to be physically and verbally berated during that time. Again, I don't want to overstate my case here. A lot of other things were going wrong. I'm just using this as an example that third place loss was a part of the equation too. Combine all of that, though, with the fact that you also just lost the opportunity to generally see all of your close friends in person in any context, let alone in a third place or your first place, and you get the perfect recipe to make an already growing and obvious loneliness epidemic even worse. And then, as a ripple effect of the pandemic, even though we're now theoretically past it, we're now theoretically over it, many places and communities actually still haven't recovered from the loss of third places that occurred during that pandemic. Steinkuhler in 2006 was already taking for granted the fact that third places were in decline, but the first major observation of this rapid decline of third places actually comes from the theorist Robert Putnam in his book Bowling Alone, The Collapse and Revival of the American Community, where in 1995, in the journal article of the same title, he was beginning to lay the early groundwork on that idea, with it fully fleshed out with the publication of the full book in the year 2000. In Bowling Alone, Putnam makes the observation that third places are critically important to building what's known as your social capital, or the power and influence you gain by knowing people in your community and conversing with them and building connection. At the same time, Putnam makes the observation that while Americans at the time of writing Bowling Alone were bowling more than at any other time in American history, and that bowling was a more popular sport than ever, bowling league membership had declined by over 40%. The most whimsical yet discomforting bit of evidence of social disengagement in contemporary America that I have discovered is this. More Americans are bowling today than ever before, but bowling in organized leagues has plummeted in the last decade or so. Between 1980 and 1993, the total number of bowlers in America increased by 10%, while league bowling decreased by 40%. The broader social significance, however, lies in the social interaction and even occasionally civic conversations over beer and pizza that solo bowlers forego. Whether or not bowling beats balloting in the eyes of most Americans, bowling teams illustrate yet another vanishing form of social capital. Along with bowling leagues being used as a proxy for the decline of American third places, Putnam also does note that churches, parent-teacher organizations, and all sorts of other social groups and social clubs and labor unions were all also seeing declining membership as a part of their long-term trends as well. And the impact of all of these organizations, PTO groups, labor unions, churches, bowling leagues, becoming smaller and losing members, wasn't just that they were now weaker organizations at the tasks they set out to do. It was also a sign that we, individually, were beginning to become more isolated, more stowed away, and we're losing social connection with each other. And when American social capital begins to decline because we are beginning to lose a sense of community and connection with each other, we also see increases in rates of loneliness, declines in mental health, a decline in a sense of civil service and citizenship to your community, and this all ultimately makes it more difficult for us to organize and to build problem-solving coalitions and problem-solving groups that fix community problems. I think a really good personal illustration of this disconnect that we all have to some degree now is that I, as someone who is a lifelong walker and biker and who absolutely advocates for a car-free or car-light life and for bike infrastructure and for better walkways, didn't know that Denver already had a really robust lobbying group for bike infrastructure, the Denver Bike Lobby. Now look, I really appreciate the work you all are trying to achieve over there at the Denver Bicycle Lobby, but could you have workshopped that name for even 5 seconds? Conservatives get these really cool badass names like Moms for Liberty, Daughters of the American Revolution, Handmaidens for the Liberation of Oppressed Men. Meanwhile, we get nerdy little organizations like the Denver Bicycle Lobby. Can't we have a cool name for once that's actually exciting and violent? And despite my literally walking the walk of pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure advocacy, the only way that I found out about the Denver bicycle lobby was actually on accident, because the mayor of the group, Denver's bike mayor, was an alumna of my university. That's where this could be an example of a marketing failure. This group just hasn't really put its name out there effectively. Maybe it's a failure on my part in my researching of the groups that exist in my city for this issue I care about. Or maybe it's an example of the fact that there just wasn't great civil society built around bike infrastructure and around the biking community, and it made it so I only found out about this group on accident. And that's where ultimately, it's probably all three, but we should probably do everything that we can to remove that third factor to the best of our ability. Oh, it's getting hot. Okay, we're going to get through. Now, there may be a lot of reasons for why a city does or doesn't have a really strong civil society, but the existence of stable and visible third places is certainly a major component of whether or not you have a coherent civil society. Even going back to the example of the Denver bicycle lobby, the only reason I even knew about that bicycle lobby and how it worked was because I knew the person who would end up becoming Denver's bike mayor, because she was a student at my university, and I studied at many of the third places around my university to meet her. Without those third places all around my university campus, I would have never really had the accidental connection needed for the Denver bicycle lobby to stand out to me. That also means I would have never learned about their awful, awful name that they really need to change. Seriously, call yourself something like Denverites for Pedestrian Freedom, or something cool like that. Please, just stop calling yourselves literally the thing you do. It's not interesting, and it makes you seem boring. I think a more relatable example would be contrasting all of the sitcoms that we know and love that paint the cities that they're in as these beautiful, vibrant places with so much going on, with another sitcom that really, really just does everything in its power to make you feel like that there's nothing to love about the city it takes place in. The Office is a sitcom that overwhelmingly takes place in the Scranton branch of a company called Dunder Mifflin, making it so nearly all of the show, the overwhelming majority of its time, is spent in a second place, the place of work for all of the people at Dunder Mifflin. The impact of this decision is that one could be forgiven for thinking that Scranton is actually a very dreary place, a place with almost nothing interesting to do. The show very rarely actually has any third places to speak of, and whenever the people of Dunder Mifflin are at a third place, it's almost always under the pretense of it being some sort of work-related event, or some sort of happy hour, or the Dundies, and that ultimately makes it so while they are in a third place, it's not serving as a third place, because they're losing that sense of neutral ground, that sense of being able to relax, of being at home, because ultimately your boss is there, watching, judging, reviewing. The result is a sitcom that very frequently makes everyone's self-awareness of the meaninglessness of their lives and the meaninglessness of their work the joke. That meaninglessness is best created through the fact that they are almost never in a third place, where their lives are allowed to exist outside of the production of work, outside of the selling of paper, outside of the limits of capital, and instead they are all reduced down to what they can do for their second place. One of the times in the show where it actually begins to have a really deep and profound moment where you understand much more deeply and much more in your soul the lives of these people is when Pam is actually able to produce her own art and is able to be separate and independent of the office. And while yes, one of the most heartfelt moments of that episode comes from Michael Scott coming up to her at her art gallery and saying some profound words to her, there's an earnest loss of that sense of this was a workplace function happening in a third place. This was Pam being at home, being somewhere she wanted to be, celebrating something that she did, and then a coworker removing rank, removing the position of power, and instead allowing themselves to be neutral with each other. And the consequences of the loss of third places goes beyond just that sense of dreariness and emptiness. It also can harm our ability to build great political organization. As an example of this, in the nation of Cyprus, there are coffee shops that actually make an explicit part of their function being there for people to gather and discuss left-wing ideals. Some of them even signal this by hanging up giant portraits of Vladimir Lenin, a design choice that is interesting. And this use of coffee shops and of third places as an area for political organization isn't unique to just Cyprus. It's just a more fascinating example of how widespread this is. The United Kingdom has long had a history of coffee shops being a place where they are used in order to build new political organizations. As Kelly Intile writes in 2007, because of their egalitarian nature, coffee houses became the first environment where opinions could be openly debated. Even if segregation with regard to social class, economics, and education still existed in Greater England, it was suspended at the coffee house for the purpose of fostering an atmosphere of open and uncensored debate. The reason coffee houses differed from any other public forum at the time was that the proprietors were concerned primarily with running successful businesses and not with flattering the elitist pretensions of a few customers by excluding others. It was in their best economic interest to promote an environment that welcomed all points of view, regardless of the social status of their patrons. Regardless of how much you care about abstract ideas like social capital, we need third places to be sane. We need third places to feel like our cities are home. We need third places in order to be our full selves. And that's where we now need to talk about why it is that we're losing third places all around the United States. Okay, Bean, go. COVID certainly didn't help with the situation with third places, but there was already work being written about their decline in the early to mid-1990s. So I don't think it's fair to say that COVID is the driving force for the decline of third places, even if it exacerbated a lot of the underlying forces that were causing their decline to begin with. That's where Putnam gave a proposal for what it is that was causing the decline of third places back in his book, Bowling Alone. Putnam puts the blame overwhelmingly at the feet of the rise of media that allows you to achieve entertainment and satisfaction from your own home without you ever having to leave the comfort of it. At the time, Putnam was talking about TV as the primary media causing this, but today we can look at the internet writ large and also social media, and the fact that that has made it so every single person with a basic internet connection can achieve all the entertainment they need to feel satisfied at home and never need to go out. I mean, I can see this in my own consumption habits. I want to be entertained, so I decide to stay at home and watch a few videos and then ultimately spend some time alone. I don't go out to the bar. Too many other people make that decision as well, and because of that, the bar goes out of business. With the bar out of business, people now feel like that they've lost an area of their community that lets them feel at home. This makes them feel like their city has nothing interesting to do, nothing to offer, no life underlying it. And so they make less of an effort to find new third places. They feel defeated. And ultimately, this feedback loop of third places dying because people are consuming media at home, causing third places to die at an even faster rate, making people feel despondent from their city, and then they suddenly feel like there is nowhere they can go that actually feels interesting, fun, or unique. It spirals out of control. And COVID hyper-accelerated this feedback loop because a year and a half of no one using third places caused them to collapse in large amounts, and many downtown areas have not recovered from those events. So, Emily, in the editing process here, I realized that while discussing this topic of why third places are dying, I painted it as there's only one good explanation, and that's this phenomena of media consumption habits changing how we interact with third places as entertainment. I do stand by it's a major factor, and it's one that I still wanted to be the core focus of this video and what I explore here. However, I do want to acknowledge the two other explainers that I think a lot of other people would note. The first being the increased suburbanization of American infrastructure in American cities, and the other being the growing effects of income inequality, changing who gets access to third places as a result of how third places typically still have as some bare minimum limiting factor, your ability to access capital as a way to interact and enjoy them. So, I do have citations being added to this that I highly recommend you go to for more in-depth explanations of where those two theories come from. It's just that's not the focus that I had while working on this video, and I didn't want to redo the entire focus and theme of it at this point in the process, but I wanted to properly acknowledge it's a more complicated story than the one I give here, and I'm just explaining one factor that stood out to me and that I think is substantiated in the original works that were not done through the lens of capital or the lens of income inequality as their core ways of evaluating this. And I think more credence is given to this when you remember that one of the people that we talked about earlier who was exploring digital third places, Steinkuhler, ultimately, I think, actually stumbled upon not just a phenomena of how people are trying to build new social interactions, but also an example of how physical third places are dying because of the media we're creating, are dying because of the entertainment that we're producing. Along with casual, more capital-oriented third places like bars and cafes being in decline, there's also been a decline in churches and religious institutions all across this country. And that isn't just because of the increased secularization of America. That's also because people, regardless of their religious affiliation, are going to church less, to temple less, to their synagogues less. Whatever your institution is, no matter how you decide to practice religion, the average person is going less. Now, there's probably a few good explanations for this decline in church attendance, but let me take a few cracks at it myself. I think a major factor is because all of the impacts of media distracting people away from cafes and bars, God-fearing, NASCAR-watching good heterosexual Christians are not immune from that. TikTok doom scrolling is an equal opportunity activity, and the good Christians can do it just as much as us godless gays, and they can also decide that their For You page is more important than church. You heathens. It could also just mean that because of the increased secularization of America, many communities now don't have many churches that are all in close proximity to everyone, and instead have increasingly fewer churches, making it so a smaller and smaller group of people have easy access to their church. And that is causing people to ultimately decide that going to church isn't worth the effort. It could also be because churches and religious institutions have been put in an impossible position a lot of the time, where you kind of feel like you want guidance from your church on political issues, but then there's also the intense political polarization of our modern moment, probably overwhelmingly caused by social media, but that's its own video. And that ultimately makes it so every single church is left in a position where they're damned if they woke, damned if they broke. Which was such a bad line. I thought that line would read better when I wrote it, but here we are. It's like you can't even give an opinion on the abortion question anymore without women getting mad about you trying to remove their rights. To say that another way, you can't get away without saying anything to your congregation about the pressing issues of our time. Silence is violence and all that jazz. But also once you do give your opinion, now the other half of the congregation is mad. The liberals are mad, the conservatives are mad, the leftists are mad, the Nazis, I don't know, maybe they're doing great. I don't know, I try to not keep up with them. And it makes it so that's probably a part of this. Political polarization and the naturally political position of churches ultimately become incongruent to the sustainability of your church meeting as many people where they're at times. Now, I'm not saying that therefore churches and temples and synagogues and mosques should now all be neutral on all issues, and nor am I saying that we should be apathetic to the politics they take on. I know that I wouldn't go to the temple I'm a part of if it began actively advocating for my own extermination. But Lord knows I'm such an attention-starved little baby, I might actually let it slide here and there. If you're gonna order a big ol' heapin' helpin' of hurtin' the gays, if it's only a small side meal of transphobia, I guess I'll take it. At this point, it may seem hopeless. I mean, the third places are a critical component of civil society, of feeling at home, of feeling like you can enjoy and love your city, and they are dying, and they have been dying long before COVID. They've been dying because of the creation of TV. They've been dying because of modern social media. They've been dying in constant negative feedback loops that are all around us constantly. It can feel hopeless. So what are we to do? So it's not all doom and gloom for third places. There are things that you and I can do to rebuild them. First, go to church, you godless heathens. Even if you aren't religious, go to church. There are atheist churches, apparently, and secular ones, so go there. Heck, there are even psychedelic churches if you want to go somewhere, do some shrooms, and then start praying to the mushroom gods or whatever it is that you all do. You could form your own community groups, like a queers-only volleyball group that I know exists in my city. I wonder if there's a video that exists that could explain who all may be invited to that group if it's considered a queers-only volleyball group. Like and subscribe! Please. I'm begging you. Now, I'm sure saying just make a community volleyball group in a public park certainly sounds pleasant until you recognize that there is absolutely a race and class divide that exists in who gets public parks and how well they're maintained. Something that's just a fact of the world in my city, as I can imagine it is everywhere. Now, I definitely went and researched a little bit about my city for that fact, but the reason I say I assume about everywhere in the US is because when I sat in history class and we went to the section where they said, and then Reconstruction happened and we all lived happily ever after, something about my brain went, that doesn't sound quite white. Wow, I have no questions about why it is that my school district is 95% white when I'm in a city that has about 60% white population. However, just because it may not be easy to do that type of community activity building due to the systemic issues of who gets public spaces to do community building in, that doesn't mean it's impossible, and that doesn't mean it isn't worth exploring what exists in your community and what do you have access to that is better than nothing. You can also do what I did, and that's earnestly self-reflect and ask, have I really tried my best to be a part of the community that I'm in and learn what's going on in it? I mean, there are a lot of really great community events all around cities across the country that I'm sure the average person is missing and sleeping on because they just haven't really tried as hard as I think we sometimes would like to tell ourselves we have. Now, I'm not projecting my own failures onto you. I'm just asking, maybe we should self-reflect a little more about whether we've really gave it the old college try. For example, I talked about the litany of factors that may have existed to prevent me from learning about that bike advocacy group in my city, but the reality is I do think of myself as a biking infrastructure advocate, and so it ultimately rests on me, the fact that I never learned of this group. They existed. They had things available for me to find them, but I never really did a good look. All that is to say, there is a bit of personal complacency I think we need to resolve when it comes to the fact that our third places are dying. Complacency around our media consumption habits, complacency around the value we put on where we go when we want to relax, complacency about our role in the broader system that is a city's civil infrastructure and the places that we can visit and how long we have to visit them. We can also start by also exploring one of the most beautiful and underutilized third places that almost every American city has, your public library. I mean, get a library card and read a book. Clean up your room, go to the library. Put down the tick-tock tic-tacs and check out a 3D printer and get into a lame hobby like that. Just do anything with your public library, please. And I know that there is certainly, just like with public parks, an issue with who gets public libraries and when. But, again, at least make the attempt. Also, I was joking about 3D printing being a lame hobby. I have a 3D printer, their name is Ellie, and yes, they are non-binary. They told me so themselves. I think to best establish how beautiful public libraries are, just look at this list of words that people in the communities of Australia gave when asked by the Friends of Libraries Australia, or FOLA. Anchor schemes for urban regeneration, community anchors, community builders, community catalysts, windows to the world. You know that public libraries are truly a beautiful place when that is how you can describe them, is windows to the world. That's also how you know that gay people use libraries, because only a gay person would have written such a poetic way to describe a giant building with 3D printers and books in it. I make me laugh. And that's what truly matters. It's not the views we get or the subscribers we get. It's the dumb jokes about gay people we told along the way. What I'm saying is, and maybe this is something that I really need to tell myself, and I'm saying this for myself, stop blaming the city you're in for being lame. Touch some grass, put down your TikTok, get a library card, and say yes to life. That is how we will rebuild our third places and rebuild our beautiful cities, our beautiful communities.